In this episode of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast, we get hyped for WrestleMania. Firstly, we will be looking back and reviewing the past 5 WrestleManias. Then we'll round out the show with a discussion about why this could be the best WrestleMania WWE has ever put on. I'm talking about WrestleMania 40 in only 2 weeks. My name is Owen. This is the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. We'll be back right after this. If you're listening to the show on Google Podcasts, please note that the service is shutting down on April 2nd, 2024.
Well,
hello
and welcome back to the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for listening, as always. My name is Owen, and today the hype train for WrestleMania 40 is just leaving the station, and we're going to get really into talking about the show as we're under only 2 weeks until the first night of Mania. That's right, we are less than 2 weeks away officially. It is the 25th of March. WrestleMania 40 goes down live from Philadelphia on April 6th and 7th. And yeah, we're getting closer by the day. And I just wanted to go ahead and start with a little bit of hype content to just get everybody in the spirit of WrestleMania season. And I wanted to look at the cards from the last 5 years starting off. Later in the show, we'll dive into, like I said in the intro, why this could be the best WrestleMania WWE has ever produced. But we're going to start with a retrospective to try to give us momentum and see, what has the trend been with WrestleManias over the past 5 years? Have they been good? Have they been bad? Is there reason to believe this could be the best WrestleMania of all time? Because that'll kind of set the stage for that discussion on the latter half of the show. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the card for WrestleMania 35. But what I wanted to do before we look at cards is I wanted to actually look at cage match user ratings. So we all know cage match is a topic of debate on the internet. Some people love it, some people don't. It is what it is, right? It's kind of the Metacritic for the wrestling community. And it's just a place where, large swaths of people, large swaths of wrestling fans put their ratings for shows into the ether, and you can agree with them, you can believe them, you can take them as, gospel, you can believe that they mean nothing. That's fine. But I do think it just kind of gives a little anecdotal, here's, flatly what people generally thought, right? It's just like any opinion poll. You're not getting everybody, you're not getting every perspective. But you can just kind of look at it as generally people might think blank. And that's what we're going to use it for here. So I basically got the user ratings for every WrestleMania since WrestleMania 35. And I also got the match cards, like I mentioned, for every WrestleMania since Mania 35. Just so we can talk over every match, give it a short review. And then, like I said, we're kind of doing that to set the stage for WrestleMania 40 and just kind of tell you what you might expect from this card. Not in matches exactly, not who's fighting who, but in match quality maybe, right? In storytelling, in booking. And I'm not saying every show is the same. Of course they're not. Every show is very different. But I would say that since 35 especially, WrestleManias have definitely gone on a different trajectory. I think 35 was really the breaking point. We'll get into it in a second, but 35 was really the breaking point because it was almost a 7-hour show for including the pre-shows. It was almost a 7-hour show for the live crowd, including some, if there was, I don't think there were dark matches on this card, but, off-screen promos and things like that. That was about 7 hours, almost 7.5 hours for the New York crowd. And that was really the turning point where WWE said, we can't do this anymore. Nobody likes it, which that card was kind of, going to be a really well-received Mania, but because of how long it took, it definitely took a beating with the reviews because of how long the show was. I do think if they trimmed it down, that would have been one of the best reviewed Manias of all time, but alas, it's not, simply because of the length of the card. So without further ado, I want to get into these show by show, but I just did want to preface that to say they really seem to be kind of upping the quality of their Manias ever since 35 because of how
panned that length was. And ever since they've gone to the 2-night format, just something about it. The booking's been better. The matches have been better. I started watching wrestling at WrestleMania 33, and let me tell you, the quality in each WrestleMania show has only gone up since 33. So without further ado, let's start with 35. The show that I mentioned just a second ago, and the 7.5 or whatever hour card it was. And I don't know the exact numbers for the length because, like I said, it obviously the television audience, the live audience, the kickoff show, all of those factors give you different times. It depends on what you include and what you don't include in that metric. But I don't want to mess with all that nonsense. So without further ado, the first match of the card was Tony Nese and Buddy Murphy squaring off for the cruiserweight title. And I'll be honest, I watched this show, but I don't remember this match at all. And it could have been I was just maybe making food and getting ready to watch, and I didn't feel like I needed to watch this match entirely. But look, Tony Nese was a perennial jobber in WWE. Not that he isn't one in in AEW and Ring of Honor. But that's definitely what he was in the cruiserweight division. And make no mistake about it, he was jacked. He had the look. He was good for the division. He was a great, reliable heel worker. But from a booking perspective, he was always going to lose in WWE, especially in a title match. So he loses to Buddy Murphy, who was the retaining champion. He picks up the win. That was a 10, and let me just preface this. I'm not going to go over the length of every match, but that singles match for the Cruiserweight title to kick off the show was 10 minutes and 40 seconds. And I'm not saying those guys don't deserve 10 minutes, but when you look at the length of some of these other matches, you start to go, wow, I don't think that match needed to be 10 minutes. Next up, we have Carmella winning the Women's WrestleMania Battle Royal, which they had to give that generic name because of the whole, issue with the not Mae Young, but the Fabulous Moolah. I was thinking the Mae Young Classic. She is respected unlike the Fabulous Moolah generally, who got, her name expunged from this Royal Rumble or Battle Royal, I should say, because that's what it was initially called. But anyway, Carmella picks up the win. She last eliminates Sarah Logan. That's a 10-minute match. That's pretty average for a WrestleMania kickoff battle royal. And I will say that we still are on the pre-show here. But look, these are still matches. Again, when we get into some of the length of these matches, you can already tell it doesn't make sense why they went so long. Next up, you have Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder defeating the Revival, who were at the time the current tag champs, but Hawkins and Ryder end up actually picking up the tag team championships. And at the time, I was a huge fan of this because Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder were, jobbers that weren't taken seriously, and WWE seemed to kind of stomp on them whenever they had the opportunity to, right? And to, forget about them, job them out, not take them seriously as wrestlers. So I think Zack Ryder obviously was always massively underrated during his time in WWE, basically pioneering the ability to get over on the internet. And they never took advantage of that, and they just, they didn't think he was important because they were too busy pushing guys like John Cena and Randy Orton. And in any case, I think that story, that backstory of we're always underrated, the company doesn't like us, we're not company guys, we're underdogs. Them winning against the Revival, who at the time were, heel jobbers, kind of. I mean, they were tag champs, so they weren't jobbers in that sense. But they lost here. If they really, really wanted to build the Revival up and didn't think they were jobbers, then they would have retained here, but they didn't. WWE, in addition to Hawkins and Ryder, are known to have not taken the Revival, now known as FTR, very seriously, right? They never really did. They had some really poor, I thought no flips, just fists was a horrible slogan and weird booking. And that could have been part of their creative control, but what they do in AEW right now is a lot better, a lot more professional. And I mean, they're over like Rover. They're one of the biggest tag teams of all time now, and I would argue it's because of their AEW run, and not their run just in AEW, but they picked up championships in every indie that they could while they were working in AEW. So I think that run really cemented their legacy. But in any case, this match I thought was a pretty awesome, fun moment at the beginning of the show, and I like it when good things happen to the underdogs, and that's what happened here. Braun Strowman wins the Andre. That is the 30-man Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal, basically the men's equivalent of that women's Royal that went on, although there's more men in it than there are women in their Royal. I should mention Carmella getting that win made sense because she was really kind of being pushed at that point in time. She ended up winning the Money in the Bank with James Ellsworth. She had that whole run. She had a lot of kind of time in the spotlight once she was able to shed Enzo and Cass. But anyway, in the men's, we have Braun Strowman, who actually ended up last eliminating Colin Jost. Colin Jost and Michael Shea, the hosts of Weekend Update on SNL, were both involved in a storyline with Braun Strowman heading into Mania 35. Because they're both from New York. I'm not sure if they're from New York, but they're based out of New York because of SNL. And WWE always likes to get celebrities involved. So that's what they did here. So Braun Strowman wins the match, but it was actually Colin Jost coming in second, which is pretty funny. Then we have Seth Rollins on the first match, the main card, I should say. We have Seth Rollins basically defeating Brock Lesnar in what amounted to a squash match. That is, the Universal title match. Seth Rollins defeats Brock Lesnar, who came into the show as champion. And it has been a while since I watched this show, but I do remember, Brock basically had a hiatus, was going on a hiatus from WWE. And that's pretty much why he dropped the title here. And I could be wrong about it, but I remember reading some rumors and dirt sheets. And I remember that, Brock was about to be on hiatus for a little bit. So he lost, in a pretty dominant form by Seth Rollins. But he actually drops the belt here to Seth. And then we go to AJ Styles and Randy Orton in a singles match. I should mention that previous match was only 2.5 minutes. But then this match here, AJ and Randy Orton, goes for 16:20. You can already see the pattern here with timing. AJ Styles wins. I don't remember this match very much either, but two consummate workers. I know they had a feud going into the show because why else would they have fought each other here? But AJ Styles and Randy Orton that's never going to be a match by any by any stretch of the imagination. So, if you have some opinions on this match, please put them in the comments. I'm sorry I can't share much just because I don't remember this match. Might have stepped away for a snack, but in any case, AJ gets the win there. Then the Usos defeated Aleister Black and Ricochet, who were kind of one of these odd couple tag teams at the time. Rusev and Shinsuke Nakamura were also a tag team, and The Bar. That was a fatal four-way for the WWE SmackDown Tag Championships before these were unified. But yeah, the Usos basically were already champs, so they retained. I do remember The Bar was really one of my favorite tag teams at the time. But I really never understood Aleister Black and Ricochet or Rusev and Shinsuke Nakamura. I mean, it felt like these very thrown together tag teams that Vince McMahon said, hey, I don't know what to do with these two guys, so let me put them together. That's how it felt then, and that's how it feels now, looking back on it. I'm not saying these guys couldn't have chemistry. It's just a tag team has to have a reason to be a tag team. You can't just say, hey, you and you, be friends. And if that's what happens off screen, then great, but you gotta give us a storyline reason for it, right? Because to be fair, that is what a lot of times, two promoters will see two guys. A wrestling promoter will see two guys and they'll say, hey, you guys want to work together? And They will, but we have to be given a reason on television for as to why they are together. And it just felt like in this era of WWE, there are a lot of tag teams that just got thrown together. And to some extent, still see that now, especially in the women's tag division. But thankfully, not as much. But anywhere, Usos here, they retain. Um, the New Day was not on a sort of tag team, not in a tag team feud at this time because this was in the middle of Kofi Mania. So Kofi was doing his singles thing, and New Day was really his, kind of cheerleaders at this point. Shane McMahon defeats The Miz via pinfall in the Falls Count Anywhere match, and boom, that timer is rearing its ugly head again. 15 minutes and 30 seconds. Not a bad match, but it is a Shane McMahon WrestleMania match, so you know what that means. It's a spot fest without a lot of substance or in-ring psychology. A lot of big jumps off of, ring supports. And when I say ring supports, I don't mean turnbuckles. I mean the big sort of sets that they put over the ring as a shade and lighting rig. Shane jumping off of those. Shane jumping off of barricades. He did what he did. He did this as well against AJ Styles at WrestleMania. But look, for what it is, it was fine. But I do distinctly remember coming away from it feeling a little underwhelmed. But look, it's Shane McMahon at Mania, so of course he's got to pick up the win. He defeats The Miz. And then we get on to the next match, which was the Iconics, who are no longer obviously in WWE. The Boss and Hug connection, that is Bayley and Sasha Banks, Nia Jax and Tamina, and then Beth Phoenix and Natalya. That is a fatal four-way for the women's tag team titles. The Iconics pick up the win there. They had a great run with these titles. That was a tag team that definitely had a reason to exist and was not by any means thrown together. And they did well in the indies too after they left WWE. But here, I'm sure it was a great match. I don't remember it in full. But the Iconics were a great heel women's tag team that really, I would say for a time, definitely carried the division on their backs. Was it by looking goofy and strange? Sure, of course it was. But however they did it, it was great. And I'm glad we got to see it, even though they're no longer with WWE and no longer very active as a tag team. I'm glad to see it when we did. I should mention that this match actually, going into it, Bayley and Sasha Banks actually held the title. So sorry for that error there, but the Iconics picked them up here. Next up, we have what was really the emotional high of this whole card, which is why when I get into another match on this card, you're going to see, wow, they kind of put this match in a weird place. We have Kofi Kingston with his friends in the New Day, Xavier Woods and Big E by his side, defeating Daniel Bryan, who was in his heel Planets Champion gimmick era. He had Eric Rowan by his side. And this was, of course, for the WWE Championship. At the time, the WWE Championship belt was, changed by Daniel Bryan to be basically a burlap strap with wood and rocks. And, it was a great gimmick. I don't think that sort of gimmick should be the heel, somebody who's globally, and globally conscious about recycling and climate change and taking care of the planet. I don't think that is a heel thing to do. I think that's a babyface message. But WWE is gonna book how they want, and what they did is they got Kofi over, and Kofi didn't even have to play into, he didn't have to go against Daniel Bryan and say, "Well, I hate the planet," and get cheers. He didn't do that. He just got over because he was Kofi Kingston, and there was this sort of groundswell to get him to be WWE champion. He'd been in the company for a long time and never held a major singles title. So you just had the crowd behind him, and it's a similar rise to Daniel Bryan's rise in at WrestleMania 30, honestly, with the Yes Movement. So it is funny, that he is taking on Daniel Bryan here, who's in a completely different position. But anyway, Kofi Mania in full force here. The emotional high of the night by far. I think if this match even ended the show, I think we'd be looking at this card a lot differently now. But in any case, Samoa Joe takes on Rey Mysterio in a squash match for the WWE US title. He wins 58 seconds. Not much to say about that match. As a Rey Mysterio fan, I was upset by it, but what are you going to do? You got to make Samoa Joe look dominant. Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre have a singles match in which Roman Reigns wins by pinfall. Don't remember this one very well, but both men were separated out of the main event title picture by this point. They obviously would both get back into it, which we will get to, but at this point in time, they were not, so they ended up having a singles match. Then this is the match I alluded to earlier, which is you have this emotional high of Kofi Kingston finally winning the WWE champion, being the people's choice, finally winning that. That's the emotional high. That's the climax of the show. And then you have Triple H and Batista in what I felt was a slog of a no holds barred match. I mean, you could say it clogged up the card too, but I would call it a slog because not that both men aren't good at working, but it felt very long and tired, and maybe it was because the show was long, and maybe I was tired at this point in the card, but it was just not paced well. They did a segment where Triple H grabs Batista's nose ring with pliers, and I thought that was absolutely excruciating to watch. It wasn't fun. It was just weird and gross, in my opinion. Everyone has their own opinions. I read a lot of people who really loved this match on the internet, but I did not, and I just think that at that point, that's when the energy for the whole card really went down a big notch. Then you have the retirement match of Kurt Angle, who no one wanted him to take on Baron Corbin, but he did. And it was a pretty irremarkable match other than Kurt Angle, getting his time in the sun. It was 6 minutes. It was Baron Corbin picking up the win by pinfall, winning clean. And I don't know what to say about it other than I think we all kind of wanted something a little different for Kurt Angle's last match. But look, we all got the happy send off with him at the end. He got to wave to the crowd. He got to cry. That was special. I just think they could have done it better. Then we have the Demon Finn Balor defeating Bobby Lashley, who at the time was, managed by Lio Rush, which is a blast from the past. This is for the WWE Intercontinental title. The Demon picks up the win in only 4 minutes, and I loved it because I was a huge Finn Balor fan at the time. And good match, but kind of short, and they didn't really get to tell their story the way I think a lot of people would have wanted them to. But it's such a bloated card at that point that, what are they going to do? Then you have what was touted as the first women's WrestleMania main event, and that's because it was. And this was supposed to be the huge emotional climax of the night. I don't think they shouldn't have made it the main event. I mean, I think it was great to have it the main event. I think you just got to trim down the fat a little bit on the rest of the card, and it would have hit a lot harder, in my opinion. Becky Lynch taking on Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair in a triple threat winner takes all match for both the women's Raw World Championship and the women's SmackDown World Championship. I think that this was a really well wrestled match. It was really fun to watch. The build was great. The drama, the psychology was great. But the ending was very abrupt, and I just don't think it had that payoff in the same way that we all wanted it to. And again, you could blame the length of the card, but I think that just says, hey, if the card was a little bit shorter, they might have been able to build the drama a little bit better and have a more satisfying ending. So in any case, let's look at the rating for this card. This was a 6.56 on Cage Match. So out of 10, that tells me that this card could have been rated a lot higher, probably, if it weren't for the length. I mean, 6.56 for this show, in my opinion, is a little bit high. I would give this show more of like a 5.5. But yeah, you can tell that with a rating that high, there's no doubt a lot of people who tanked it for the length of the show. So it could have been as high as 8 if not for the if I had to guess, if not for the pure length of the show. And in my opinion, the down spots are definitely the retirement match, the no holds barred match, the Shane McMahon and Miz and Falls Count Anywhere match. But the rest of the card was pretty solid. And yeah, let's go ahead and get to 36. 36 is, as we know, a special case, and that's because it was behind closed doors as a result of the COVID pandemic. Um, let's just kind of let's go over this one a little bit more quickly, only because they had this one in 2 nights, so it was shorter, right, proportionally shorter. And it was behind closed doors, so there's not a lot you can say about the set or the fans or the atmosphere, because unfortunately there was none. They obviously had a set, they put it on in the performance center, but just not what we come to expect when we think WrestleMania. But they did their best, and I think this was a really great show for what they could do. Let's get into the actual card, though. For the pre-show, we had Cesaro. This is night 1. We had Cesaro defeating Drew Gulak in a technical bout that I felt could have gone longer. I thought it was great, but I definitely felt like it could have gone longer, and I was kind of hoping for more at the end of it. Then we have Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, who were in a tag team at the time. They actually took on the Kabuki Warriors and defeated them for the women's tag titles. That's a 15-minute match that I frankly do not remember very well, but I think that Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, they were in a tag team and then they ended up blowing it off in a feud. And the Kabuki Warriors are still together in Damage Control to this day. So it's interesting how different the trajectories of those tag teams have gone. Elias, in the third match of the night, defeats King Corbin by pinfall in a singles match. I did not like what they were doing with Baron Corbin. I didn't really even like Elias's character that much at the time, so I steered pretty clear of this match. But Elias picking up the win was probably the right decision, just because of how insufferable the King Corbin character was, and by design, I should mention. But Corbin's a great character worker. But yeah, they didn't have a clear booking decision for him, even though he tried his best. And they haven't had a clear booking decision for him until recently, when he's been in his tag team with Braun Breaker. They had no clue what they were doing with his gimmicks. So anyway, that's kind of, this is kind of like day one of Baron Corbin's identity crisis with his, poorly booked gimmicks. And again, not his fault, because he's a good character worker when he's given something good, but he just got in a rut where he was not given anything good by creative. So Elias picks up the win there in 9 minutes. Becky Lynch takes on Shayna Baszler in match number 4 for the Women's Raw Championship. Becky Lynch retains. I mean, Shayna Baszler was obviously no slouch, but I think it was a pretty foregone conclusion into this card that Becky Lynch would pick up the win, and she indeed did. Next up, we have Sami Zayn, who is the IC champion. This was when he was a heel, if I'm not mistaken. He actually had Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura by his side. He defeats Daniel Bryan, who has Drew Gulak by his side, for the pinfall victory to retain his IC championship. And you can see how different the trajectories were. 1 year, Daniel Bryan is fighting for the main event championship of the whole company, and now he is in a mid-card championship bout that he's not even able to win. So doesn't say anything bad about Daniel Bryan whatsoever. It's just, interesting how the, career trajectories went after Kofi won that Mania title match at 35. So next up, we have John Morrison defeating Jimmy Uso and the man I just mentioned, Kofi Kingston. This one is actually a triple threat for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships. I know it sounds weird because it's just 3 dudes, but they were basically representing the rest of their respective teams. Kofi Kingston, obviously part of the New Day, Jimmy Uso, part of the Usos, and John Morrison, part of the Miz and Morrison. Just pausing for effect there because it's pretty obvious who these guys were tag teams with. But yeah, triple threat ladder match that John Morrison ends up winning for his team. That was actually a pretty long match, coming in at 18 minutes and 30 seconds. But it is a ladder match with some of the best veteran tag wrestlers WWE has ever employed. Next up, we have Kevin Owens, who ended up defeating Seth Rollins by pinfall in a no DQ match. I don't really remember this match. I know they had a feud, but I don't really remember what the basis of the feud was. It's not over a title. So, I will admit when I say I don't have great information for you on this one, but Kevin Owens does pick up the win in a pretty lengthy match at 17:20. Then Braun Strowman. This is basically the co-main event here. Braun Strowman and Goldberg for the Universal Championship. Basically ends up being one of those quick 2-minute, showcase matches. Basically, the match that gets people to buy the card. Which is, we had these Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar, these Braun Strowman versus Brock Lesnar, these Braun Strowman versus Goldberg. These big name attractions that were, that were booked in order to try to appeal to the casual fans in order to buy the show. But anyway, Braun Strowman ends up winning that match and therefore the Universal Championship in only 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Then we have The Undertaker and AJ Styles in a Boneyard match, which was one of 2 cinematic matches in this card, and we'll get to the second one shortly here. But yeah, I thought this was one of the best matches I saw the whole year, especially during COVID. It was really a bright spot for me. This match was pure art, great directing, great everything, great moments. It was Taker's retirement match, and not a lot of us think of it like that because it was behind closed doors. But it was, and it was a great match. And I don't know what else to say about it, but it is my personal favorite match of this whole card. Next up, we have Liv Morgan and Natalya in a women's singles match. Liv Morgan retains. Don't remember that one, but we can go ahead and get to the next one, which was another women's match. Charlotte Flair taking on Rhea Ripley for the NXT women's title. Charlotte Flair actually takes it off of Rhea, which I know was very widely panned at the time, because why would Charlotte Flair need an NXT women's championship with all of her main roster accomplishments? You're taking it away from someone in Rhea Ripley who arguably actually benefited from it more. And would benefit from it more than Charlotte ever would at this stage in her career. So very odd booking decision there. That one did last for 20. I didn't enjoy it because I knew that Charlotte was going to win and I wasn't happy about it. Aleister Black taking on Bobby Lashley, who's accompanied by Lana. This was a singles match. I don't really remember their feud or storyline going into this card, but Aleister Black does pick up the win. Next up, we have Otis defeating Dolph Ziggler in a singles match. And Otis, had to get over as a singles wrestler because of the loss of his partner. I shouldn't say loss. It's not like he passed away or anything, but, Tucker, did get released by WWE. So they no longer had that tag team of heavy machinery. So Otis had to go it alone here, and he ends up defeating Dolph Ziggler. And this was a very early start to how over Otis would become as a singles wrestler. Edge taking on Randy Orton in what was booked as the greatest wrestling match of all time, unless I'm remembering something else. This could have been just a different match between the two, but I do know that obviously Randy Orton and Edge faced off in what they booked as the greatest wrestling match of all time. And I don't remember if this happened at WrestleMania 36, but I will go ahead and fact check and get back to you at the second segment of this show. But this was, regardless of if it was billed as the best wrestling match ever, this was a last standing match in which Edge took on Randy Orton and defeated him. I think everyone pretty much on the internet agreed this match was way too long. It went 36 and a half minutes, almost 37 minutes for a match that was largely backstage and not a lot of in-ring action. And I just think that it tired a lot of people out. And I don't think it really, not only did it not need to be this long, but if you're going to include a big production value heavy match like this, you should probably trim the fat a little bit and get rid of one of these singles matches without a stipulation, because this one just went far too long. And then I should mention that, by the way, we are on that night 2 right now, in case I didn't already bring that up. The Street Profits defeat Angel Garza and Austin Theory for a WWE Tag Team Championship. The Street Profits win. Not sure what to say about Garza and Theory. What with they're so separate as far as booking goes nowadays. They don't even rub elbows. Voice crack there. But yeah, they don't even rub elbows in the main roster nowadays. Austin Theory's doing his thing with Grayson Waller, and Angel Garza has had a lot happen to him over the year that he's not involved with Austin Theory either. So anyway, the Street Profits pick up the win there, and pretty foregone conclusion. In a fatal 5-way elimination match for the WWE SmackDown Women's Championship, we have Bayley taking on Sasha Banks, Lacey Evans, Naomi, and Tamina. I think the only feasible option to win the title here was Sasha Banks or Naomi. I guess that's 2. But Tamina and Lacey Evans would not have made sense, so I'm glad they didn't do that. Bayley ends up retaining, and yeah, just a great high energy women's women's 5-way bout. I should say all these are great. All these women are great wrestlers. Lacey Evans and Tamina. It just so happens that Bayley, Sasha Banks, and Naomi were the most over. So they wanted to put on somebody that was very over, and they kept it on Bayley. The Fiend Bray Wyatt takes on John Cena in a Firefly Funhouse match. Now, this one was absolutely incredible. I know a lot of people on the internet prefer this one to the Boneyard match. I personally still hold a sentimental, sort of feeling toward the Boneyard match because it was, Undertaker's last match. But this match was equally incredible. Great direction, great camera work, great special effects, great everything. You have some memorable moments like John Cena coming out doing an NWO gimmick. All sorts of things that just made this match so special. And it is very hard to think that we will never get a match quite like this again because Bray Wyatt has left us far too early. And, I just think that if he got to do more cinematic matches like this, we'd all be spoiled with the wealth of wrestling riches. But anyway, that for what it was at the time when he was still with us, this was an incredible match. Arguably his best match, period. But definitely a lot of people have it in their best match of Bray Wyatt's career. They have it in their best match of WrestleMania 37. People really love this match for good reason. The Firefly Funhouse was a really great experiment that they might want to replicate, but I don't want them to do it in a irreverent way. We'll have to see if they ever do that. But from a business perspective, it would make sense to replicate. Then you have Drew McIntyre defeating Brock Lesnar to what's supposed to be his fanfare, but obviously no one is there. It's supposed to be his crowning achievement. He wins the WWE Championship, but he does so in front of 0 fans. And that's what we're still getting this year is we're getting an upset Drew McIntyre. I've gone through so many things. I've won the championship without any fans. Now I'm just going to take the championship when and how I can, whenever, however, whatever he's got to do. And I think that storyline has really just been writing itself. And it's pretty beautiful. He will be taking on Seth Rollins for his heavyweight championship now that they've, messed with the belts a little bit. But yeah, McIntyre will be taking on Seth Rollins this year at Mania 40. Not for, the heavyweight title is not a lesser title. It's just a different title because this match was before the unification. So anyway, Drew McIntyre picks up the win and thereby the singles WWE Heavyweight Championship, as what it was called at the time. Sorry, I meant to say singles men's title, but anyway, you know what I mean. The black belt back when it was still black, and it was the WWE Men's Championship. So we also have a dark match, which was Drew McIntyre defending his newly earned championship against Big Show. And that was just a singles match. But yeah, that actually did happen on the dark match of this card, which is funny because it was an unoccupied, performance center. Other than wrestlers there, this was filmed at a performance center. So it's kind of funny that you call this a dark match because who's really going to see it other than the people in the match and the people booking it and all that. So anyway, Drew McIntyre wins the championship, goes out with a bang, pyro, lights, everything. Everyone was very happy for Drew, even though they couldn't be there, unfortunately, to celebrate him. But who knows? Hopefully one day Drew will win the title and we will all get to share in his joy, and hopefully he'll win it as a babyface. But before we get into the next segment, I wanted to look at the card ratings for 37, which was night one, got a 7.58, which is the biggest so far. Granted, we have only done 2. And night 2 got a 6.0. So you can see the disparity between night 1 and night 2. It definitely drops off a little bit. But I think these numbers are pretty fair, at least for the first half of the card, because although again, it was behind closed doors and it didn't have the sort of gravitas that we think of when we think of WrestleMania. It was still wrestled very well. Great wrestlers on this card as always, and I think we should basically understand that, hey, we got one rating here of the 7.58. But I think that overall, even with the 6.60 for the second night, I think overall this was a great show. They did what they could during a pandemic, and I think it paid off to some extent. Could have done a little more with Drew, maybe could have drawn out that match a little bit. It was only 4.5 minutes. There were some kind of filler matches, and of course, I would say the low light of most people's nights on this card was that Edge and Randy Orton 37-minute match. But yeah, anyway, let's go ahead and get into the second segment of the show. That's your first 2 WrestleManias from years past. We'll be right back after this. The Marksville Wrestling Podcast is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling is where you can find the podcast early before it drops on other platforms. And it is also the home of exclusive behind-the-scenes content, Q&As, and more. If you like the show and would like to support it, please consider doing so on Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Marksville Wrestling. Thanks for the support, and back to the show. Welcome back. So I wanted to say that the last segment went a little bit long just because of how big WrestleManias are generally with their cards, but especially with 35, that 7-hour card definitely didn't help me at all. But as we round out the review of the past 5 WrestleManias, just to give you an idea of what this upcoming Mania might be like, I wanted to, because that was the purpose of this episode, I wanted to focus on more of the WrestleMania moments rather than the matches, because I'm going to kind of highlight a pattern here that I think has emerged over the past 5 WrestleManias, and I think it's going to continue to be in that pattern come WrestleMania 40 in only 11 days as of recording. So without further ado, and I do want to say before we get into this, WrestleMania moments for the uninitiated are events that basically only can happen at WrestleMania according to WWE propaganda, of course, but they can happen whenever creative wants to book them. It's just that they pull out all the stops at WrestleMania, right? Because it's the showcase of the Immortals. It's their biggest pay-per-view or premium live event of the year. And, they want to make it a big deal, so they make a lot of crazy things happen. The narrative behind it is that these things can only happen at WrestleMania, but of course, they can make them happen whenever. It's just a booking decision. But in any case, let's go through and again, I'm gonna bring up WrestleMania moments is in an effort to highlight a pattern that I think is gonna continue as we get into WrestleMania 40 very shortly here. So anyway, WrestleMania 37, that's what we're gonna go to next. This was the one that was in Tampa before a smaller reduced audience, which is funny because the Super Bowl also happened out of COVID in Tampa with a reduced audience. And that is likely just because of Florida with the lower COVID restrictions compared to other states. But yeah, it's funny that was the case for both WrestleMania and the Super Bowl, which are obviously the biggest events in their respective sports. But anyway, the first match of the Mania 37 card, this was also, I should say, the show that gave us Samoa Joe in a poncho, which is a very timeless meme at this point. And, very happy that we got this show coming out of WrestleMania, got to have a live crowd, but we also got that funny moment. WrestleMania 37 started off with Bobby Lashley attempting to retain his WWE Championship against Drew McIntyre, who obviously became the champion at the previous Mania. So he's trying to reclaim what he believes is rightfully his. But he is not able to because Bobby Lashley picks up the win via technical submission. That is that match. And then we go on to match number 2, which is Natalya and Tamina eliminating the Riot Squad, that is Liv Morgan and Ruby Riot, via a tag team turmoil match. The winners received a WWE Women's Tag Team Championship on the second night of this card. And I should mention, obviously, the Riot Squad is no more because Ruby Riot is now Ruby Soho in AEW, but Liv Morgan's still there. But anyway, Natalya and Tamina actually won that match. They'd go on to, take that title match opportunity into WrestleMania Night 2, which we'll get to. And then Cesaro defeats Seth Rollins in a singles bout, which I don't remember that feud very much. But Cesaro does pick up the win. It's 11.5-minute match. AJ Styles and Omos. Now, I do remember this match because AJ Styles and Omos definitely felt like one of those WWE thrown together tag teams, at least in my opinion. And they end up defeating the New Day for the Raw Tag Team Championships, which I at the time thought was a very strange booking decision. But they were in the middle of Omos's push there when they were trying to push him. And, they teamed him with AJ Styles, which if you're trying to team a newer guy with anybody, it should be a veteran like AJ Styles. I understand that. That's why they were trying to keep them together, was in order to give Omos some momentum, going into his push. I get that. But they just didn't make sense, in my opinion, as tag champs because they didn't have a lot of a history together. And the New Day are an actual tag team that had trained for tag team wrestling and been tag team wrestling together for a very long time. So, I feel like these thrown together tag teams dethroning an established tag team is always kind of a slap in the face. But that was what WWE was doing at the time. And that's kind of what they're infamous for, unfortunately, in the tag division. So yeah, next up we have Braun Strowman and Shane McMahon in a steel cage match, which is another one of Shane McMahon's extreme WrestleMania matches where, in my opinion at least, Vince gives him a little bit more time than he probably deserves, compared to some other more established wrestlers maybe. And he gets to do these high spots where his matches are basically just spot fests, let's be honest. But Braun Strowman picks up the win there, leading into his, they were trying to push Braun throughout this whole period. So that helps him with that. That is a pinfall win, I should say, by Braun. 11.5-minute match. So not really that long of time for a steel cage match, in my opinion. but probably the right amount of time for Braun Strowman and Shane McMahon, especially given the other matches on this card. Bad Bunny and Damian Priest. Now, this was one hell of a match. I mean, you could call this maybe the match of the night, I should say. But yeah, Bad Bunny and Damian Priest defeat The Miz and John Morrison in a tag team match, which is your obligatory celebrity moment for WrestleMania. But Bad Bunny cementing himself as one of the best celebrity wrestlers in the past, 20 years, one of the best of all time, maybe. And yeah, this was his debut, but he has at this point cemented himself to have those titles I just mentioned. So yeah, I loved this match. This was before Damian Priest was the kind of juggernaut heel that he is right now, but it was great for them to get the win here. Bianca Belair defeats Sasha Banks in a one-on-one singles match for the WWE SmackDown Women's Championship in the main event of night one, which I thought was an incredible show-stealing main event. Definitely had the right place on the card, and it gets all its flowers. There's a lot of people who say this is one of the best women's matches of all time in WWE, at least. I'd have to agree with them. Randy Orton and The Fiend face off in a singles match. Obviously, Alexa Bliss is there with The Fiend, and this is where we got some weird, hookum pookum, I guess you should say, for lack of a better weird word, weird voodoo stuff, in which Alexa Bliss basically turns evil on The Fiend with some, this big Jack in the Box contraption, and then her eyes start melting, and basically, it was weird. It was The Fiend booking that we were used to. But Randy Orton actually ends up winning. And I felt like a lot of people believed that this was a burial of The Fiend, and no one really liked it from a booking perspective. But, I'm trying not to talk too ill about any of these angles because Bray Wyatt's no longer with us, and we need to respect him. Wrestling, at the end of the day, is wrestling, and human life is a completely other, more sacred entity. So, in any case, this was a really short match that a lot of people felt like it, wasn't booked well, but can't talk too much about that other than rest in peace, Bray Wyatt. Next up is Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler when they were in a tag team. A lot of people might not remember that only because Nia Jax in the other tag teams, one with Tamina, and then Shayna Baszler in other tag teams with Ronda Rousey. That's probably her best known one. So just letting you know, this has to do with the thrown together women's tag team division of WWE, which I already mentioned. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler, they end up defeating for the women's tag team championships Natalya and Tamina. I should say by technical submission, but you can just tell these are already 4 women that really don't have any reason to be in tag teams with each other. Tamina and Shayna, Nia and Natalya, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But Shayna was in her tag team with Ronda Rousey, and that made sense. So you can make it work. It's not that these women are bad tag team wrestlers. It's just that these pairings didn't make sense in my opinion. Nia Jax and Tamina were a tag team. That made a little bit more sense because of their, distant family relationship. But the other ones, Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax, and then Natalya and Tamina, make no sense in my opinion. In any case, Jax and Baszler pick up the win and the titles there. Kevin Owens defeats Sami Zayn in a singles match with Logan Paul by Sami's side because that's when the two were playing heel together. It was before Logan was really an active wrestler on the roster, so they were still kind of baby stepping him in at this point. But yeah, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn in the ring is always magic. I don't think I need to talk about that one too much, but Kevin Owens picks up the win there by pinfall. Sheamus defeats Riddle by pinfall in a singles match for the US title. And Sheamus getting another mid-card title. I don't think a lot of people loved this at the time because people really wanted Riddle to be pushed to the moon. And he ends up losing a mid-card title, so I don't think people loved it. But Riddle's no longer with the company now, and Sheamus is one of the most respected veterans in WWE right now. So I think that hindsight it probably wasn't too big of a deal because Riddle wouldn't end up doing a lot with the company anyway, between his, hiatuses and whatnot. So poor booking in general. Not all of it his fault, but in any case, Sheamus in this match beat Riddle for his U.S. title and became the new champion. Then we have Apollo Crews, who also becomes a new mid-card title holder by defeating Big E in a Nigerian drum fight, which look, there's nothing wrong with Apollo Crews winning a mid-card title. There's nothing wrong with that. But WWE making up a stipulation and not explaining what it is at all is a tale as old as time. This was basically, if I remember correctly, just a no DQ match with weapons and, interference and all that fun stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just think that WWE coming up with names for things that don't have to have names because they already have a name, like a no DQ match, it's something they do, and I never really liked it. Apollo Crews wins Big E's title from him there in about 7 minutes. Then we have the co-main event, which is Rhea Ripley defeating Asuka for the Women's Raw Championship. And this was kind of Rhea's crowning moment in a lot of ways. She still has to really cement herself as the biggest woman in the company. She mostly has, but I do think that if and when she wins at WrestleMania, that'll really quiet all the haters and cement her as the biggest woman in the company, possibly the biggest woman in wrestling over the past, 10 years. She's a really big deal right now. But anyway, Rhea Ripley defeats Asuka to pick up her Raw Women's Championship. She's now obviously the holder of the WWE Women's Heavyweight title. But yeah, then we have Roman Reigns and Edge and Daniel Bryan in a triple threat match for the WWE Universal Championship. This was still kind of in the early days of Roman Reigns' monster title run. Didn't feel like that at the time, but he has had such a long title reign that you should look at this as the early days, believe it or not. Roman Reigns wins, defeating Edge and Daniel Bryan in a 22-minute bout. Now, I'm not saying this was a bad match. It wasn't. It just was a foregone conclusion, so I didn't get too invested in it because I knew Roman would retain. So the cage match user rating, I wanted to note one thing. The cage match user rating for WrestleMania 36 was actually 5.85 for night 1 and a 6.18 for night 2. I got my numbers mixed up. The cage match rating for WrestleMania 37 was a 7.58 night 1 and a 6.60 night 2, which I had previously attributed to 36. So, based on that trajectory so far, WrestleMania 35 had a 6.56 for one night. The highest score for WrestleMania 36 was on night 2, which was 6.18. And the highest score for 37 was 7.58, which is night 1. So that's a pretty big jump in ratings between the two manias. And I think that just goes to show that 37 could have been a little bit brought up by the fact that it was in front of a live crowd again. But I think it was just more, consistent, better wrestling, and no cinematic matches. So you're getting people's hype back for real in the ring wrestling, I do think it was definitely hampered by that Randy Orton burial thing. And then I don't know. I'm not saying anything bad about the main event, but I think maybe one of these women's matches that ended up stealing the show could have been the main event instead. And then that stipulation match was a bit weird, just because of the fact that they created a stipulation without needing to. Also, Omos and AJ Styles going over the New Day. I didn't love that, but this was a consistent card, even though it sounds like there are little things I picked on about it. The first night was definitely better, so I understand why it has that user rating on Cage Match. So 38. Now 38 in my opinion, and make of it what you will, but 38 in my opinion was really the return to form for WrestleMania. I'd been watching WrestleManias since 33. I know, not that long. But I never felt like they had that magic I expected from a WrestleMania. Beginning with 34, 35, 36, none of those really had that wow factor that I was hoping for when I started watching WrestleManias. And 33 didn't really either, but it did have the Hardy return and it had the John Cena proposal to Nikki Bella, which I both thought were great moments. And I just think that it's gotten a lot better, starting with 38. I think that's where they got the magic back, if you ask me. But that's just my opinion. The Usos, in the opening match, the Usos defeat Shinsuke Nakamura and Rick Boogs. I did not like this match, and it's not because they weren't good wrestlers in this match. It was because of the sponsorship. The gear of Shinsuke Nakamura and Rick Boogs were sponsored by Mike's Harder Lemonade, and it was all over the ring apron and all over the LED screens. I thought it was gaudy and a waste of space, and it just detracted from the match horribly. Not the guys in the match's fault, I just didn't. I thought it was really shameless corporate marketing. But anyway, the Usos defeat the pair of Rick Boogs and Shinsuke Nakamura for the SmackDown Tag Team Championships, therefore retaining their belts. Drew McIntyre defeats Happy Corbin as a part of their feud. Obviously, this was when Happy Corbin was paired up with Madcap Moss. And Drew wins via pinfall. Not skipping over that match. I do think it was a little forgettable, but the rest of the card definitely made up for it. The Miz and Logan Paul defeat Rey Mysterio and Dominic Mysterio by pinfall in a tag team match. This is where there's actually a turn at the end of the match, and the Miz walks out on Logan Paul. I'm not sure if Logan Paul, punches or anything. I think what he did is he was trying to beat down Rey Mysterio after the match, and the Miz said, "Hey, you can't do that," and came out looking like the baby face, and that's when they kind of had a short feud because they were paired together for a while. But anyway, the heels pick up the win there until one of them turns babyface at the end of the match. Bianca Belair defeats Becky Lynch by pinfall for the singles women's Raw Championship. I personally think this is the best women's match of the past 5 WrestleManias. I loved this match, and it has a lot of good ratings on the internet. Obviously, you don't want to take those as the gospel, but I do think people seem to agree that this was a very, very good match. Bianca Belair retains, and honestly, by this point in the card, I didn't really know that it could get a lot better, but, that's just my opinion. I was a little disappointed to have to watch the rest of the show, quite frankly, because of how good this match was. Then we have the return of the American Nightmare, Cody Rhodes, to WWE. Everyone knew he was going to be the mystery opponent to Seth Rollins, but we just had to see it to believe it. And he comes out to his AEW theme, and it's bonkers in there. This one, not their fault, but they followed a really good match, so I did have trouble kind of keeping track of this one and getting into it. But Cody Rhodes did win, which I certainly expected. And then we have Charlotte Flair defeating Ronda Rousey for the WWE SmackDown Women's Championship. And not much to say about Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey. Not my favorite pairing of, women for a championship bout. Not that they aren't great at entertainment and, being stars. And I just don't think Ronda Rousey is the best wrestler necessarily because it's not her forte. She didn't start out wrestling. So I don't expect her to be the best wrestler in the world. But Charlotte Flair, at this point in her career, I personally just got tired of the Charlotte Flair oversaturation. Not her fault. It just kind of became a point where she was kind of like the female John Cena, where you just give her the belt because you don't have anybody else to push. And not her fault again. But it did feel also like they're trying to shoehorn her to match her record with her dad for title reigns. So in any case, this was kind of in the middle of that, situation for me. But Charlotte does pick up and retain her belt, pick up the win and retain her belt there. Then we have Stone Cold Steve Austin returning to Dallas, taking on Kevin Owens in a no-holds-barred match. And there's obviously a lot of shenanigans before and after this match. Pat McAfee got involved. Vince McMahon got involved. There's also some stuff that happened on night 2, which we will get to. But this was a lot of fun. This was a great way to close the show in Dallas. and I don't think they could have had a better main event, to be honest, for this WrestleMania. Then we have RK Bro. That's obviously Randy Orton and Matt Riddle defeating the Street Profits and Alpha Academy for a tag team championship. That would be the WWE Tag Team Championships. RK Bro were champs at the time. They were super over and they retained, so that was the right decision there. Bobby Lashley defeats Omos in a singles match that a lot of people were worried about at the beginning because they didn't think it would be a very athletic or fast-paced or entertaining. But I think it beat a lot of people's expectations, and it wasn't the best match on the card, but it was pretty good for a big man match, I would say. Then we have Johnny Knoxville defeating Sami Zayn by pinfall in an Anything Goes match. This was a complete comedy match. Not my thing. I do like comedy wrestling, but for whatever reason, this one just didn't land for me. Maybe it's I don't. There were a lot of Jackass tie-in jokes, and I'm not familiar with Jackass, so that's possibly why this didn't appeal to me. I really didn't understand any of the inside jokes. I know they had the Wee Man out there. I didn't know who he was, so call me crazy for not watching Jackass. But yeah, I was not really into this match. Sasha Banks and Naomi defeat Carmella and Queen Zelina. That is Zelina Vega. Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley and Natalya and Shayna Baszler by pinfall. And you can already see Shayna Baszler and Natalya are paired up now, which that's an inverse of tag team at a previous, you can just see how these tag teams don't make sense in the women's division. Sasha Banks and Naomi was a good tag team for a while there. I mean, they ended up walking out with the belts. But Carmella and Queen Zelina is kind of a weird thrown together pairing. I think Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley worked better than a lot of people thought it would. But still, thrown together women's tag teams, and I don't know what to tell you about this division. It is getting better, but I just think WWE has had trouble booking tag team wrestling for a really long time, and it shows. But anyway, I should mention that Sasha Banks and Naomi picked up the win here. And like I said, that, they ended up holding belts for a while, and that led to them leaving the company with those belts, and therefore they had to get vacated. Edge defeats AJ Styles in a singles match by pinfall. And Edge putting it all on the line and showing why he still is a great wrestler and why he still deserves to be on a big stage like WrestleMania. And, not one of these part-timer attractions like Goldberg that eats up time. Edge deserved the time because he proved that he can still go with everybody. And he's still going in AEW right now. So I think Edge is a freak of nature, and ageless wonder. He picks up the win here against AJ Styles. Then in a tag team match, which ended in only a minute 40, we had Sheamus and Ridge Holland defeating the New Day by pinfall. If it's such a short squash match like that, I really don't need to cover it. But then we have Pat McAfee defeating Austin Theory. And Austin Theory was obviously, teamed up with Mr. McMahon in the background. Because, they were building to the fact that no one really liked Austin Theory, but Vince McMahon did. So let's get him out here and really play into that. So yeah, Pat McAfee defeats Austin Theory by pinfall. And then you have Mr. McMahon, because of that loss, he basically gets in there and says, "Hey, Austin, let me show you how to win a match." So he ends up winning Pat McAfee in a impromptu match, more or less. And that match is only 3:45, and I don't remember the finish entirely, but I'm sure it was a dirty finish. And a lot of shenanigans with that, like I mentioned, but just pure sports entertainment stuff at its best. Then Roman Reigns in the main event defeats Brock Lesnar, and this was the one that they had billed as the biggest WrestleMania event of all time. Main event of all time, because it was the winner takes all match for both the WWE Championship and WWE Universal Championship. Basically, it ended up being a unification match. Roman defeats Brock, and I think everyone was happy to see that they were just gonna stick with their guy and put Brock to bed for a little bit instead of, having his reign of terror continue. Because I think a lot of people were tired of Brock at this point, only showing up on TV every few months and defending his belt. But that's funny now that we're in the same position with Roman Reigns, of course. But I digress. So I wanted to get the match ratings for this. So the cage match user ratings for 38, we actually have a pretty steep drop in the night 1 rating from the previous show. The night 1 rating is only 6.21 for WrestleMania 38, but the night 2 rating is an 8.04. So as you can tell, that's the biggest rating so far. And yeah, that's a pretty big deal if you ask me. And then we have the WrestleMania 39 match card. So this was obviously last year's WrestleMania. And I will cover, like I mentioned at the beginning, I will cover those WrestleMania moments when I'm done running through these cards. And just kind of piece those together. And anyway, WrestleMania 39 started off with Austin Theory defeating John Cena by pinfall. This match was not very well wrestled, and I just don't think it really checked a lot of people's boxes. But the right guy went over. Austin Theory retained his U.S. title against John Cena. Then we have the Street Profits defeating Braun Strowman and Ricochet, Alpha Academy, and the Viking Raiders by a pinfall in a men's WrestleMania showcase match. Title's not on the line, but it was basically one of those matches that you use to get as many people on the card as you can. Seth freaking Rollins defeats Logan Paul by pinfall. This was a fun, silly sports entertainment match. KSI shows up dressed as a Prime bottle. Logan Paul inadvertently does a drop onto him on the announce table, and just a fun, over the top spot fest sports entertainment match. And I think it was silly, but it was fun. Trish Stratus, wow. Lita and Becky Lynch defeat Damage Control in a 6-women tag team match, and then Trish Stratus turns heel at the end of this match, which would build into a feud between her and Becky Lynch going into the coming months. Rey Mysterio defeats Dominic Mysterio by pinfall in a singles match, father-son singles match, I should say. And the intros on this, the entrances in this WrestleMania for Rey and Dominic were incredible. Dominic showing up in a truck like he just got out of prison. Rey Mysterio showing up in a lowrider with Snoop Dogg. I should mention Dominic basically showed up in a prison transport vehicle. That's basically what they implied. And it was really funny. He was getting escorted to the ring by a bunch of police officers. And it was just top notch. Then Rhea Ripley defeats Charlotte Flair for the Women's SmackDown Championship. Another what you could call crowning moment. This time it's against Charlotte Flair. So again, that opinion I have about Charlotte Flair is definitely shared by a lot of people on the online wrestling community. So people were very happy when Rhea picked up the win here. Then we have Pat McAfee and The Miz in one of those really short segments that they're just using to kind of stall and get, build time for the rest of the card if there's people that need to rest up in the back or warm up or whatever it may be. That's what this was, but Pat McAfee defeats Miz by pinfall. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn defeat the Usos by pinfall in a tag team match for the undisputed WWE Tag Team Championships. And do I really got to say anything about this match? I mean, this match made people cry, myself included. This match made people, just fall back in love with wrestling. And this is one of the biggest emotional climaxes in wrestling within the last 10 years. It really is. The way the time they took to build this and the time they took to pay it off and the way they paid it off is borderline unbeatable, if you ask me. Brock Lesnar defeats Omos to kick off night 2 in a singles match that's largely forgettable. Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler defeat Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, Natalya and Shotzi and Chelsea Green and Sonya Deville in a women's showcase fatal 4-way tag team match. Don't want to cover that because you guys already know how I feel about the women's tag team division. But again, this was another match to get everyone, as many people as possible, onto the Mania card. Gunther defeats Sheamus and Drew McIntyre by pinfall in what many people thought was the match of the year and match of the show, at least. Gunther retains his IC title, And he still holds it to this day, so we'll have to see who ends up taking it off of him when all is said and done. Bianca Belair defeats Asuka in a singles match for the WWE Women's Championship, the Raw Women's Championship, I should say. And Bianca Belair retains because she was the title championship going into that match. Snoop Dogg defeats The Miz in what is basically a repeat of the Pat McAfee Miz thing, except in this case, they tried to have Shane McMahon show up instead of Pat McAfee, and Shane McMahon tore his quads when he ran into the ring. So the Snoop Dogg basically had to get involved and call an audible, entertain the fans, and it worked. He dropped a people's elbow that did not look very convincing, but The Miz sold it very well, and it was fun and silly, and I think they did the best damage control that they could. Edge defeats the Demon Finn Balor by pinfall in a Hell in the Cell match that I think went a little bit long. It was fun. I just don't think the pacing was great. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was a good match. And then in the main event, I could spend hours talking about this, but anyway, Roman Reigns defeats Cody Rhodes by pinfall to retain his undisputed WWE Universal Championship, and we are still in the era of Roman Reigns, hoping for Cody to dethrone him here at WrestleMania 40. So without further ado, let's look at the cage match rating for 39. So night 2 gets a whopping 8.72, which is the biggest of these 5 manias. Night 2 only gets a 6.67, so that is on the lower end, not the lowest by any means, but on the lower end. And if you go all back the way back to 36, 36 was the show that had the lowest. Night 1 rating was 5.85, and 35, even though with its long card, actually had a better rating than that. So the lowest rating is Night 1 of WrestleMania 36 with a 5.85, and the highest rating of the past 5 manias is Night 1 of 39 with an 8.72. So look, at the end of the day, these ratings are subjective. But I do think that they kind of give an idea of where people's heads are at with, the past 5 years of WrestleMania. So without further ado, I'm going to round out the show with why I think this could be the best WrestleMania 40 of all time. But before we get to that, we're going to finish the, looking at the moments here, because I did mention I wanted to do that. So the Mania moments, kind of leading in my narrative why I think 38 brought the magic back. 35 had no real discernible Mania moments other than John Cena coming out as his old gimmick with Word Life. And then you have Kofi Mania. That is obviously a huge Mania moment, but those are only 2 that I can really think of. Then you have 36, which has its Mania moment of, the main event being Drew McIntyre walking away with the title, but nothing on the show hit very hard because there were no fans, right? So unfortunately, that was a big moment. It just didn't have the same kind of appeal, the same feeling. They did have that Boneyard match, which I think was a moment in and of itself. The same could be argued for the Firefly Funhouse. But again, kind of slim pickings on those just because of the nature of the show, and unfortunately in the middle of a global pandemic. 37, it's kind of in between in the sense that it was in person, so the big moments could be enjoyed more, but I can't think of any crazy, returns or debuts or anything that happened on 37. And other than that Samoa Joe poncho thing, there wasn't a lot memorable to the show other than the wrestling, at least if you ask me, and I could be forgetting something, but I just didn't feel like there was anything super noteworthy that happened compared to, the return of the Hardys, for example, 33, or to the return of Cody at 39. So anyway, 38. Now this one definitely had some moments, and this is why I think 38 brought the magic back. So you had the return of Stone Cold Steve Austin, of course, right? You had his whole thing with Vince McMahon and Austin Theory and Kevin Owens. That was a huge moment in and of itself. Cody Rhodes returning, obviously just mentioned, huge moment. And Johnny Knoxville, big comedy matches like that, I would say are moments or can be moments. I didn't like it, like I said, but definitely a moment if you like that kind of thing. And it was fun. What can I say? And yeah, that's kind of, I would say, the key WrestleMania, quote unquote WrestleMania moments from that card. And then last year's Mania, 39. I would say the key here, obviously we had those silly moments with Seth Rollins and Logan Paul, KSI. I would call that table spot definitely a WrestleMania moment. I would call Rey Mysterio and Dominic's entrances both WrestleMania moments for sure. And I would say that Kevin and Sammy winning those tag belts was the moment of all moments. Realistically, I mean, this is one of the best WrestleMania moments ever. Um, and then Snoop Dogg in that kind of botched, people's elbow segment that they had to do. That was a WrestleMania moment, even though it was a little bit sloppy. So without further ado, we're going to end it here and just kind of round out the show right after this. And I will give you a idea as to why I think WrestleMania 40 could be the best WrestleMania WWE has ever produced. We'll be back right after this. Looking for Marksville on social media? You can find us on Instagram at Marksville Wrestling, YouTube at Marksville Wrestling, and on Mastodon at Marksville Wrestling at MastodonSocial.com. Now back to the show. All right, welcome back, and thank you for sticking with me through this long episode of Marksville Wrestling. But this is a hype episode because, again, WrestleMania is only 11 days away as of recording, so I really wanted to get all the hype I could out of this. And then next show, we'll go ahead and review the shows leading into WrestleMania, Monday Night Raw, Friday Night SmackDown. We'll get serious about the build. We'll look at the card. But I wanted to finish out this episode here, this hype episode here, with basically just kind of a discussion about why I think this could be the best WrestleMania WWE has ever put on. WrestleMania 40 might be the best WrestleMania of all time. Let me tell you why. So, 35. I looked at the last 5 years of WrestleMania, starting with 35, for a reason. If you look at the card, if you look at the moments, and if you look at the ratings, you'll find a common thread. The first is that WWE, since 35, has consciously been changing things about WrestleMania to appeal to fans more. They put the show on on 2 nights, instead of one, because of the length of 35 and how poorly that was received. They fixed it. They changed it, and they fixed it for the fans. So that's one thing. Next, they started booking people to win who were more over with the crowd. Drew McIntyre's win at WrestleMania 36, granted it was in front of an empty crowd, was completely warranted and completely hoped for by all the fans. That's what we all wanted. So WrestleMania started booking those people that they might not have wanted, but the fans wanted, so they did the right thing. Then I would say that the moments got better. The moments got more memorable. They got more special. They felt better. They felt stronger. They're going to be something. Look, most people are not going to remember John Cena's Word Life segment, but they are going to remember Sammy and Kevin winning the undisputed tag titles, right? So that is an example of the disparity between 35 and then the years leading up to 39. You can just tell within the past 5 years, these moments have gotten more memorable and felt more important and more impactful on the WrestleMania card. But the show itself has gotten better. The wrestling's better. The booking is better now that we have Triple H in charge. Sorry, Vince, but look, Vince was never a great booker, and I don't want to talk about him too much because of his history and what he's got going on legally. But in the past 10 or so years, Vince has not been a good booker, and we all know that. And Triple H is really turning it around right now for the company, and that's evident in WrestleMania. So I just think that there's a trend there. And these women's matches, these women's main events have gotten better. You have younger, new, important stars. You're not relying on part-timers all the time. You're not having to call back Goldberg. You're not having to call in Undertaker. You're not having to call in people, big men with only one ability like Braun Strowman or Omos. You have variety now. You have younger stars getting involved in the cards. You have people like Rhea Ripley who are becoming the next big thing instead of relying on your Charlotte Flairs like you did for a long time. So there's just a lot that WWE, I think, has changed over the past 5 Manias. And I think that that might be why, I kind of feel like this could be the best Mania of all time. Now, granted, I was not alive, or at least maybe not watching wrestling for a lot of what people consider to be the best Manias of all time. X7, I was not watching wrestling. I was very young. Um, even started with, so I'm not trying to say 33 was one of the best ones. That was the one I started with, so that's what I'm working off of. And 31 was even recent too, and people say that's one of the best Manias of all time, but I wouldn't know. So it just basically, I do have limited scope of knowledge, I admit that, but because WWE has been booking consistently very well over the past 2 or so years that Triple H, I think it's been about 2 years Triple H has been in charge of creative, maybe a year and a half. We're really getting to the point where I think this could be the best Mania of all time. They're firing on all cylinders right now. The Cody Rock stuff is absolutely great, which I will cover in our Raw and SmackDown reviews later on the show, later in the week. And, they're just, like I said, they're just firing on all cylinders. They're not making any weird booking decisions like Vince used to, and things just make sense right now. And I don't see a better time for there to be, new ground made up, and, a new bar to be set, a new bar to be raised with 40. And I think hopefully it can only go from here. 40 is the best Mania of all time. Then maybe hopefully 41 beats it, right? As fans, we only want our entertainment to get better. And I think it always can. It just has to be, the right booking decisions, and everything's organic. Obviously matches can go wrong. Things can happen. Not every match is going to be perfect. But in any case, I think that it can only go up from here, and I really, truly hope it does. So that was a quick summary as to why I think 40 could be the best WrestleMania of all time, based on, unfortunately, my very limited scope of knowledge. But I still do think that if you just look at the magnitude of who's on the card, the combination of, people like CM Punk and Cody Rhodes, returning talents who are very over, and then younger stars like Rhea Ripley and Io Sky, who are also over in their own right, but are being developed and given time to develop. And I think that just is one of the things that really, puts a lot of credo behind this possibly being the best Mania of all time, again, in my opinion. So without further ado, that has been episode 6 of the Marksville Wrestling Podcast. My name is Owen. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I promise next episode will not be this long. But we are going to go ahead and review your Raw, your SmackDown, and we're just going to continue building the WrestleMania in the next 11 days. I hope you'll stick with me, and please keep in mind that I will be there live in Philadelphia at the Showcase of the Immortals to bring you live content. So please keep it checked in to the YouTube channel and the Instagram, which are both at Marksville Wrestling. And I will see you all next time.